Hello everyone. We're going to do Wednesday's English lesson. We're going to do a little bit of handwriting today. We're going to carry on practicing our joins. We're going to be writing about the BFG again today, and we're going to be using something today called commas, which is something that year 3 and 4s can do. So if you listen really carefully today and try your best, you'll be able to do something that will get you ready for year 3, which I think is quite exciting. As usual, we'll start with our handwriting. Where are we? Yeah, we're on this one. So yesterday we looked at the letter W, didn't we? And how when you end a letter W, it had that hooked bit at the end. Let me get it right. It had this hooked bit at the end, which is ready to join from the top of the letter rather than on the line. Okay, so I wanted to concentrate on that, and an O does the same as well. So I'm just going to forget, we're going to write the word cow today just to practice, but I'm just going to look at the O on its own, and then I'm going to look at the W on its own, and I'll show you why we're going to join the way we're going to join. So when you do your O, you'll have started from the bottom of your C, and we do a curly kitten round like that, don't we? And then we go across. We go across because that's where your W will start, all right? Because our O ends at the top. And when we go from our W, we're not going to go down back down to the line. We're going to go across. I mean, if we were going to cows, we would do that. So when we join from some letters, we stay joined in the middle of the line rather than going back down to the bottom. I hope that makes sense. So when I do cow, we'll do our C as normal, down to the line, up to the start of our O, back round to make a curly K, join it up, and we're going to go straight across into our W, and then do our W like we practiced yesterday, and a flick. Now, I'm going to show you how not to do it, and we'll see why it's really important that we're joining across rather than going down to the line, all right? So I'm just going to do that really quickly. Right. So when I do my O, if I go down to the line and then back up to my W, would you agree that that looks like it says C-A-W? I think it does. So that's why it's important that we join across, all right? Just watch it.
Cow.
Okay, pause the video and have a go. Okay, let's look at the word owe, like I owe you some money. Here you go. And it's the same again. Now this one's a little bit different. So we've got the we that we practiced yesterday, where the W goes down slightly, but then we've got that OW that we were practicing just now, all right, where the O goes straight across into the W rather than hitting the line. Let's watch.
O.
Okay, this is a really tricky one to stay all the right size, but these 3 letters should all be the same size. They're nice and small letters. They're not huge ones that sort of touch the line, okay? So we're going to do our O that we've learnt before. We're going to join straight across into our W. And when we go from our W to our E, we just go down slightly into our E, and hopefully all of our letters will end up exactly the same size. And actually you can see the we that we practiced yesterday, can't we? All right, let's just have one more go. Curly K, join it up and go straight across into your W. And we go from our W to our E, we're just going to go down slightly into our E, all right? Tricky. Have a practice. Off you go. Okie doke, let's go into our English lesson. So this is the bit where today we're going to learn how to use commas in a list. Now you might have heard of this before, you might have done it already. But if you haven't, that's fine, because we're going to learn something which might be brand new for you. So we're going to start easy. And I want you to think today about somebody going shopping. All right, it might be your mum who does the shopping at your house. It might be your dad, it might be your grandma, maybe your auntie or uncle helps, or maybe it's one of your brothers or sisters. Unfortunately for me, I've got to do it myself. So I might go shopping and I might fill my basket or my trolley with lots of different things. I might have milk or apples or bananas or eggs or bread or juice. There's loads of things that you could get from the shop, isn't there? All right. And if we were talking about it, we wouldn't say it like this. I need to get bananas and apples and milk and eggs and bread and juice. We'd list them. We'd make a list in our sentence, or if we were writing it down, we'd make a list, wouldn't we? I need bananas, apples, milk, eggs, bread, and juice. I didn't say and, did I? So I've written my list here. And here's how I would put it in a sentence. Now, if I just needed two things from the shop, then we can use and. Dad needed milk and bananas from the shop. Okay. But if there are more than two things, we don't use more than one and, because it ends up sounding a bit silly. Dad needed milk and bread and bananas from the shop. If we have more than two things, then we'll need to use a comma, but not between the last two. All right, the last two can have an and, so I would do it like this. Dad needed milk, comma, bread and bananas from the shop. So this first and can be changed for a comma. A comma, when you're doing one in your book, it's a bit like a full stop. Sits on the line. The only difference is it has a little tail like that. Okay, it needs to be sat on the line. So Dad needed milk, bread and bananas from the shop. So the first two items in our list are separated by a comma, but then the last one has and with it as well. I hope you follow me. It is quite tricky. Okay. So this sentence might look like this. I got eggs, apples, juice from the supermarket. Where would the commas go? I got eggs, apples, juice from the supermarket. I got eggs, apples, and juice from the supermarket. I got eggs, comma, apples and juice from the supermarket. Okay, let's look at this one. Oh no, I forgot that I also needed bananas, milk and bread. Bananas, comma, milk and bread. So I need a comma after banana. Milk and bread are the last two, so they can be separated by and. That's okay. All right. So, in fact, we'll stick with that for now. So what I'd like you to do is we're going to pause the video before we go to the next bit. And what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to pick 3, maybe 4 or even 5 things and just write 2 sentences in your book about my shopping list, okay? You might write, I bought eggs, comma, apples and bread at the shop, comma, between the first 2 and between the last 2 items. If you're putting 4 things in, then you'll probably need 2 commas. I got bread, juice, eggs and milk from the shop. I got bread, comma, juice, comma, eggs and milk from the shop. So if you've got more than 3 things, then you're going to need an extra comma. I hope that makes sense. So in between, so if you've got 4 things in between your items in your list, you're either going to have a comma or you're going to have and. I got bread, comma, juice, comma, eggs, and milk from the shop. Okay, so have a look at my shopping trolley. You can add a few things if you want. If you get in beans and pasta and salt and anything like that, you can add them to my shopping trolley. That's fine. In your book, I want you to pause the video and write 2, maybe 3 sentences. Have a go at using some commas in a list. Pause the video now. Off you go. Okay, so now we're going to move on. And what we're going to do now is we're going to do it, but describing our giants that we've been reading in the book. In fact, should we read a little bit more of the book before we carry on? I think we should, because the next chapter in our book has got a really good description of the BFG. Where's my internet? There we go. Okay, the BFG. So remember, Sophie had been taken in the night and she's travelled and she feels like she's in a different country, doesn't she? The BFG. The giant picked up the trembling Sophie with one hand and carried her across the cave and put her on the table. Now he really is going to eat me, Sophie thought. The giant sat down and stared hard at Sophie. He had truly enormous ears. Each one was as big as the wheel of a truck, and he seemed to be able to move them inwards and outwards from his head as he wished. I is hungry, the giant boomed. He grinned, showing massive square teeth. The teeth were very white and very square, and they sat in his mouth like huge slices of white bread. Did you spot the simile there? Like huge slices of white bread. Please don't eat me, Sophie stammered. The giant let out a bellow of laughter. Just because I is giant, you think I is man-gobbling cannibal, he shouted. You is about right. Giants is all cannibally and murderful, and they does gobble up human beings. We is in giant country now. Giants is everywhere around. Out there, us has the famous bone-crunching giant. Bone-crunching giant crunches up 2 wopsy-whiffling human beings for supper every night. Noises ear-bursting. Noise of crunching bones go crackety, crackety, crack for miles around. Ouch, Sophie said. Bone-crunching giant only gobbles human beings from Turkey, the giant said. Every night, Bone Cruncher is galloping off to Turkey to gobble Turks. Sophie's sense of patriotism was suddenly so bruised by this remark that she became quite angry. Why Turks? She blurted out. What's wrong with English? Bone-crunching giant says Turks is tasting ever so much juicier and more scrumdiddlyumptious. Bone Cruncher says Turkish human beings has a glamoury flavour. He says Turks from Turkey is tasting of turkey. I suppose they would, Sophie said. Of course they would, the giant shouted. Every human being is diddly and different. Some is scrumdiddlyumptious and some is uckishlush. Greeks is full of uckishlush. No giant is eating Greeks ever. Why not? Sophie asked. Greeks from Greece is tasting all greasy, the giant said. I imagine that's possible too, Sophie said. She was wondering with a bit of a tremble what all this talking about eating people was leading up to. Whatever happened, she simply must just play along with this peculiar giant and smile at his jokes. But were they jokes? Perhaps the great brute was just working up an appetite by talking about food. As I is saying, the giant went on, all human beings is having different flavours. Human beings from Panama is tasting very strong of hats. Why hats? Sophie said. You is not very clever, the giant said, moving his great ears in and out. I thought all human beings is full of brains, but your head is emptier than a bundongle. Do you like vegetables? Sophie asked, hoping to steer the conversation towards a slightly less dangerous kind of food. You is trying to change the subject, the giant said sternly. We is having an interesting babblement about the taste of the human bean. The human bean is not a vegetable. Oh, but the bean is a vegetable, Sophie said. Not the human bean, the giant said. The human bean has 2 legs and the vegetable has no legs at all. Sophie didn't argue anymore. The last thing she wanted to do was make the giant cross. The human bean, the giant went on, is coming in dillions of different flavours. For instance, human beans from Wales is tasting very whooshy of fish. There is something very fishy about Wales. You mean Wales? Sophie said. Wales is something quite different. Wales is Wales, the giant said. Don't gobble funk me around with words. I will now give you another example. Human beings from Jersey has a most disgustable woolly tickle on the tongue, the giant said. Human beings from Jersey is tasting of cardigans. You mean jerseys, Sophie said. You are once again gobble funking, the giant shouted. Don't do it. This is a serious and snitching subject. May I continue? Please do, Sophie said. Danes from Denmark is tasting ever so much of dogs, the giant went on. Of course, Sophie said. Do they taste of Great Danes? Wrong, cried the giant, slapping his thigh. Danes from Denmark is tasting doggy because they is tasting of Labradors. Then what do the people of Labrador taste of? Sophie asked. Danes! The giant cried triumphantly. Great Danes! Aren't you getting a bit mixed up? Sophie said. I is a very mixed up giant, the giant said, but I does my best, and I is not nearly as mixed up as the other giants. I know one who gallops all the way to Wellington for his supper. Wellington? Sophie said. Where is Wellington? Your head is full of squashed flies, the giant said. Wellington is in New Zealand. The human beings in Wellington has an especially scrumdiddlyunctious taste, so says the welly-eating giant. What do the people of Wellington taste of? Sophie asked. Boots, the giant said. Of course, Sophie said. I should have known. Sophie decided this conversation had gone on long enough. If she was going to be eaten, she'd rather get it over and done with right away than be kept hanging around anymore. What sort of human beings do you eat? She asked, trembling. Me? Shouted the giant, his mighty voice making the glass jars rattle on their shelves. Me gobbling up human beings. This I never. The others, yes. All the others is gobbling up every night, but not me. I is a freaky giant. I is a nice and jumbly giant. I is the only nice and jumbly giant in giant country. I is the big friendly giant. I is the BFG. What is your name? My name's Sophie, Sophie asked, hardly daring to believe the good news she had just heard. I'm going to stop there for today. What an odd giant he was. Doesn't he talk strange? Mrs. Caldwell really likes my BFG voice. She actually got me to speak for a whole afternoon in my BFG voice last year. That's how much Mrs. Caldwell likes Mr. Pickering's BFG voice. Now, we were going to write some sentences about the BFG. Now, we heard Roald Dahl talk a little bit about what his teeth look like. They were huge, they were white, and he actually said that they're like a loaf of bread, didn't he? He said that his ears were huge and round, as big as a wheel of a tractor, did it say? The wheel of a... It said tractor. Whatever. He said his ears were actually huge and round. So what I've done, I've thought of a few words which we could use to describe different parts of the BFG. So for his nose, I had small, black and beady. As for his eyes, sorry, small eyes, black eyes, beady eyes, yeah. For his nose, long and pointy. Huge round ears. For his waistcoat, I had brown, old, leather. For his legs, I had thin, skinny, long. You might do his hands or his arms or his skin or his hair or his kind of shirt, t-shirt, his trousers, his sandals, his feet, his toenails. I don't mind. You don't have to do the same ones as me. All right, they're just a few ideas that I thought of. Okay. So when we're putting more than one adjective describing words, when we're putting more than one next to each other, then we need a comma in between. We don't normally use and if we're using adjectives next to each other. In a list of items, like our shopping list, we might need and at the end. When we're using three adjectives or two adjectives or three adjectives, we don't normally use an and. So we're either going to have a comma or nothing, all right? Now, we use commas between adjectives if we can change them round. So this sentence, I've got three adjectives. The giant had small, black, beady eyes. I've got three adjectives, small, black, and beady. Okay, and I've got a comma in between each of them. So I've got the giant had small, comma, black, comma, beady eyes. Small, black, beady eyes. But because I can change them round, I could have the giant had black, small, beady eyes with a comma in between each adjective, yeah? Or I could have the giant had beady, comma, black, comma, small eyes. As long as you have a comma in between adjectives. So if you've got two adjectives, you'll have one comma. If you've got three adjectives, you'll have 1, 2 commas. If you have 4 adjectives, that doesn't happen very often, you'll probably have 1, 2, 3 commas. So that's quite a good thing to remember. However many adjectives you've got, you'll have 1 less comma, all right? Because it just goes in between. So here's another one I've done. For his waistcoat, I had brown, old, didn't I? So I've got 2 adjectives, brown and old, so 1 comma in between. He was wearing a brown, old waistcoat, the comma in between brown and old. Or he was wearing an old brown waistcoat. I need to change a to an because old begins with a vowel. We don't say a old brown waistcoat, we say an old brown waistcoat. Okay, so I've written a description of the BFG and what he looks like, okay? Not all of my sentences have got commas in. I've used a simile and I've used some commas and I've just done some simple sentences as well, all right? So here's mine. This giant was as tall as a skyscraper. He had a long, pointy nose and beady black eyes. His huge, round ears wiggled when he spoke to Sophie. His outfit was a bit odd. He had on an old brown leather waistcoat, which looked a bit too small. Sophie thought he looked very odd indeed. Okay, we're just going to have a look at my sentences, just to see if we can see where I've used some commas, all right? So remember commas today, we're going to put them between adjectives. So he had a long, pointy nose. There's my 2 adjectives with a comma in between. And beady black eyes. So beady and black with a comma in between. Then I've got his huge, round ears wiggled when he spoke to Sophie. Huge and round are adjectives, so a comma goes in between. His outfit was a bit odd. He had on an old brown leather waistcoat. old, brown, and leather, 3 adjectives with 2 commas in between, which looked a bit too small. Sophie thought he was very odd indeed. Okay, so hopefully by the end of the lesson, you will have something which looks a bit like that. A few sentences about what the BFG looks like, and hopefully 2, maybe 3 sentences that include at least 2 adjectives with commas in between. All right. So I'm giving you quite a challenge today, but I think you can do it. All right. So I'm going to leave this up for you. There's a few of my words. You can add your own. You can change them. You can write about different body parts. But if you want to use my words, that's absolutely fine. All right. So write your date and title and have a go at writing some sentences about the BFG and see if you can use some commas between your adjectives. Okay. And I'll see you on, what day is it? Wednesday today. So I'll see you tomorrow, Thursday, for more of the BFG.